right, welcome back, fellow jazz bums. Today we are continuing our interview series. We have Kevin Gray with us, which we are super excited to have. Before we get into it, let's remember to like and subscribe. We also live stream every Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. We have a Jazz Bums Discord, so sign up and come hang out with us there. We also have a new Threads. We have an Instagram. All that stuff's going to be linked in the description below. Come check us out. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Felipe to go over Kevin's bio.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Welcome back, fellow Jazz Bumps. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for your kind presence here in our show.
My pleasure to be here.
So, Kevin Gray, he's likely, if not the most popular and one of the most competent master engineers in the industry. He started age 18 in 1972 at Artisan Sound. He worked on many different companies and projects over the years. In 82, he officially started Cohearent Audio, which became a studio finally in 2010-ish. Then his all-new tube recording system, nicknamed now as the Hackensack West, aiming to recreate the authentic sound of Golden Age. Involved in many audiophiles, if not most of all, series from Acoustic Sounds to Music Matters to Blue Note now, and now his own studio. Kevin, welcome. You award winner engineer. Thank you so much for giving some time to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So I'll start with a kind of first question or area of discussion. It's really around kind of your early start and relationship with music. So what can you tell us about like your first contacts with music and sound? Was it an early age? What did you listen to? You know, what about about sound led you into the recording industry?
Well, that's kind of a long, detailed thing, but to try to break it down as much as possible, I got interested in music and sound and electronics even at about the age of 5. And I started, getting my parents to buy me records. And don't ask me why, but one of the first things that really grabbed me was bullfight music, which was a big thing in the late 50s. For a while, for a minute there. Mm-hmm. And so I had seen the movie Around the World in 80 Days, had that soundtrack, and there was a bullfight scene in that. And I think that's what kind of got me interested in it. Anyway, so I had the Audio Fidelity, the Brave Bulls, and the Brave Bulls Volume 2. So that was kind of my introduction to music. And then, of course, I had some of the Disney records and, that kind of stuff. But if we fast forward a few years, about the time I was starting high school, I built my first component stereo system. That would have been in 1968. And I remember one of the first records I went out and bought was Willie and the Poor Boys by Creedence Clearwater. It had just been released. So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, so you got into hi-fi early on then too, like as a teenager?
Yeah. What happened was I moved into a neighborhood, and my next door neighbor, who's 9 years older than me, had a component stereo system with JBL studio monitors, Macintosh, tube electronics. And I'm listening to some of my albums on his stereo, and I'm hearing stuff I'd never heard either on my little Silvertone, suitcase that opened up with the 2 speakers, or my parents' Magnavox, which was basically a big boombox. Mm-hmm. And so, that was a life changer for me. And that's what kind of led me to start working on building my first component stereo system.
Yeah, that just reminds me, your mastering console and a lot of, I think, your personal audio equipment is stuff that you've kind of crafted and developed. Is this coming from just an early age of being interested in electronics and learning about that and enjoying?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And how did it? Sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask. So how did you land your first job in the industry? How did that happen?
Well, I met a guy who moved into our neighborhood in 1969, January of '69, and that was Bob McLeod, who owned Artisan Sound Recorders, one of the great unsung mastering engineers, in my opinion. And long story again, but I was babysitting for his kids because I was the only kid in the neighborhood over the age of 9, and so I was like 14. And so that's how I met him. And he said, hey, I asked him, he had this awesome stereo system. And I said, gee, what do you do? And he said, I'm in the industry. And immediately I'm thinking, oh, he sells audio equipment. Maybe I get a deal. And he said, no. I'm a mastering engineer. And I said, oh, you must have a Scully lathe and a Westrix cutter head. And he said, no, I'm in lathe, no, I'm in cutter head. And I'm like, oh, okay. So he said, would you like to come down and see my facility? And I said, sure. So I went down there and I walked in the door and I see, his gleaming Ampex tape machines and the lathe and the cutter head. And he threads up a tape and he starts cutting an album. And at that instant, I knew that was what I wanted to do for a living. Everything else was just in my way of doing what I wanted to do between that and the time I graduated from high school. And then finally, when I graduated from high school, he hired me. I hung out down there every second I could get down there. I went down, especially after I got my own car in my junior year. I was hanging out down at Artisan, certainly for Christmas and spring break, and then summer vacations. And, within a couple of years, I was making tape copies of master tapes for what they called international, which were the tape copies that would go to other countries to cut the record.
All right.
And so, I learned all of the moves on the console and how to do all of that pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then he started giving me tips and asking me, what do you think this needs, and we would discuss that. And so he imparted his knowledge on how to cut a record sonically to me. And I learned that basically from him. I give him all the credit for learning that.
Oh, that is so cool.
That brings up an interesting question to me that I've thought about in the past. So like back in the 70s, 80s, when everything was getting cut to records, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was it normal to use the actual master tape to cut?
Oh, yeah. Always.
Really?
I mean, the only time we would make a copy was if there was some really crazy moves and lots of them, You could usually write down in the notes how to make, a level or an EQ change. Every once in a while, I can think of I could probably count them on one hand, the ones that we had to make copies of to cut.
Wow.
So the copy would have that corrected or prepared?
Yeah, it would have all the level and EQ changes. And
Okay.
so then you could cut the copy flat.
The international pressings were copies generally.
Well, sometimes they actually ship. We ship lacquers to Europe, so it depended on the company and the project and the size of the project.
Mm-hmm.
It all depended on basically on the record company.
Interesting.
Is there any concern about degradation of lacquers? I know that has been a topic of interest previously, but is that was there any concern about shipping those?
Well, I'm still doing it because a lot of the plants, are in Europe, like Optimal.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that if you can get them there within 72 hours, you're probably fine.
Okay.
And that's usually what we shoot for.
Mm-hmm.
And they all know that they're coming in advance, so they hopefully get them in the tank processing quickly. Yeah, I mean, it's a concern, but it's a concern that I have no control over,
Right.
Yeah. I had just a side question since we're talking about the lacquer.
Sure.
I've watched numerous amount of videos of your studio and the cutting piece from like Joe Harley's Instagram and some other video on YouTube. It's always cutting a 12-inch disc, right? And I was just curious, the idea of doing like a 7-inch, like I believe you did this one for Sam. Is it essentially the same thing? It's just the lacquer is smaller, or do you have to worry about any cutout of the center or anything like that?
No. Lacquers, masters are always cut on oversized lacquers. So a 12-inch is actually cut on a 14-inch disc. I don't know if you could tell that from the video, but yeah, it's an oversized disc because you have to make a test cut on the outside edge. And then they need that space around the lead-in groove for separating the metal part from the lacquer and all of these things so that it doesn't get damaged. So a 7-inch record is cut on a 10-inch disc.
Oh, great. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. And the center punch out, or whether it's a small hole, that all happens down the road. That has nothing to do with the cutting.
Okay. Got it. Interesting.
That is really cool.
All right. So next question. You're often asked about your recent work, but can you take a moment and talk about some of your projects from the 80s and 90s? Because you did start Cohearent in 82, and any of the learnings from those decades.
Well, 82 was not mastering. I didn't really start mastering under the Cohearent name until the end of 2010.
Okay.
So '82, I would have been working at a location. Let's see, no, that was when I started. At the end of '82 is when I started at MCA, which was one of the two worst jobs of my career. But I had never worked for a large corporation, and I didn't understand the whole mentality of get it out cheap and get it out fast, and don't worry about quality. I hated that. Anyway, so yeah, but the stuff I was doing then, well, the stuff that I did at MCA that I liked, that was good stuff. I did the soundtrack for Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which I absolutely love. Ryuichi Sakamoto. And I did the Who's Greatest Hits, one of them, but it was called the Who's Greatest Hits. I don't know how it fits in the in the discography, but and I did an album for a group called Red Rocker, and just a bunch. I'm sure you can find it all on Discogs. But prior to that, I was working at Location Recording Service, and then I had my own business from '79 to '82 as a full-time business, and then we took that part-time. The CD was on the horizon. My partner did not really want to spend the money to buy CD mastering gear. So I was offered a full-time job at MCA, and I took that, and then basically pushed the company that I had at that time for mastering was called the Cutting System. And I took the Cutting System underground until '86 when we sold it to Future Disc.
So when the CD came about, I mean, I'm sure you did a lot of mastering and stuff for CDs. Was there
for almost a decade there, I was doing no vinyl.
Oh, really? So there was just no records getting cut for 10 years?
Well, I wouldn't say 10 years. Almost 8 years, I guess. There was very little vinyl. What kind of reopened vinyl for me was when DCC decided to launch back into vinyl. After they had been doing exclusively CD work, which was in '92.
Yeah. So DCC came in '92.
Yeah, so, we were doing like not the Who. We were doing Elton John's greatest hits and the Eagles' greatest hits, and some other things, and then
that's great.
There.
And DCC has quite a reputation for sure. I heard you even work at punk bands and small labels. A lot of people, right? So when did jazz? I mean, you do everything exquisitely. It's very, very good. Everybody recognizes and likes. But especially on the jazz niche, people don't even blink. People drool over anything that you do. It's true, right? And I mean,
I don't even know how to respond to that. But but
and the question is, when did jazz become more? You got more into jazz.
Well, that's kind of an interesting question. That's a great question. And I was a late bloomer to what you would call traditional jazz or bebop or however you want to, compartmentalize it. I was mastering funk jazz and fusion jazz in the mid '70s. And I even worked with Donald Byrd. I worked with Freddie Hubbard. And I didn't even know these guys' previous work. I mean, I almost hate to admit it, but it's just a fact. I wasn't familiar with their early work. And then my former brother-in-law, whose name is John Crawford, who lives back in Oak Park, Illinois, basically sat me down and said, "Man, you got to learn about early jazz." Because the first question he asked me is, he said, "Do you know of the Jazz Crusaders?" For some reason, he asked me, and I said, "Well, I know the Crusaders." And he goes, "Well, that's the current, version of it, but you should." And so he pulled out a bunch of records, and he says, "By the time you go home, you should listen to all of these." So he pulled out Kind of Blue and Take Five. What's that called? The Timeout. And then some other stuff that was very easily accessible, like Vince Guaraldi, and the Jazz Crusaders. And so I started listening to this stuff, and then he kind of gave me the more palatable stuff that, to an untrained ear. And then he threw out a few Blue Notes, and I can remember the first Blue Notes I bought, which was The Big Beat by Blakey, and Maiden Voyage by Herbie Hancock. And so that was another life changer. That was the second big life changer in my life, was discovering what I typically called traditional jazz.
That is great.
I didn't really start mastering it, really, I guess, until the Music Matters stuff in 2007.
So
I mean, I had done a title here or a title there, but not in any quantities.
So that's actually you kind of touched the next subject we wanted to ask you about. So in that mid 2000s transition, you open Coherent, and then you work in Music Matters. How did you guys, like you, Ron, Joe, Michael, I mean, everybody got together and said, man, let's do this because we got to do it. How was the process there? How did you guys come together, and how did the workflow from there?
Well, that was still at Acoustic
Yeah,
when we started that project. And I guess Ron and Joe had kind of decided what they were going to do. But the big change was they were going to do the monos. They thought, we'll put out the monos because that's what really sells big in the collector market. Until they heard the first stereo tape. and also, you've heard that after 59, they were all marked at the bottom, mono cut 50-50 from stereo, meaning the two channels blended together equally. So when they heard those in stereo, they thought, screw it, man, we're doing the stereos. And of course, that was all 45 RPM split onto 4 sides at that time. And they thought about taking it to Stan Ricker and cutting it half speed, and they thought about a few different things, and then they decided to give me a shot, and they were really, really happy with the results, and I stayed on with the project all the way through.
Yeah. It is, I feel like that is the template. What they set up back then, I feel like is now what every jazz reissue series aspires to be.
And even the new releases, I mean, they set the bar on how jackets look, and including session photos was a great thing. It was all value added stuff, and of course they had to do a bit of that because they're charging $50 for
right.
2 albums.
Yeah,
which seems cheap now.
Yeah, right.
No.
That was 17 years or 16 years ago. Sheesh.
Yeah. And was that happening at the same time as we were cutting the 45s for Chad as well?
Yeah. I probably shouldn't get into that, but there was a big conflict over who had been promised what first. And I'll stay out of that. But yeah, so I wound up doing, them for Chad too.
Yeah, interesting. I did notice that there's a Stanley Turrentine live concert. I forget the name of it now. It has Minton's, yeah. And Chad got one of Analog Productions got one of them. I think the first, maybe the second.
Volume 2. No, Analog Productions Volume 2. The
Volume 2. And then Music Matters put out the first one. So it looks like there was maybe some compromise.
Yeah, there were. I think The Big Beat was one of the very first titles that we did, and didn't that wind up coming out on Acoustic Sounds? Whatever it was, there was a Blakey that we cut for Music Matters, and Chad wound up getting the title after it had been mastered.
Oh, right.
Really ticked them off. Anyway.
Yeah. Actually, so I have a question about this. So Analog Productions has their Prestige series that you've been a part of. Now, when that initial run sold out, I think it was Kraft. They picked it up and they did this saxophone Colossus.
Right.
And I have the hype sticker here, and it's pressed at QRP. Your initials are scribed in the dead wax.
Right.
But if you compare it to the Analog Productions series version, the scribing is a little different. So my question is, for a same title that looks like it's presented in a very similar way, I assume it's from the tapes at your studio. Was this done again
yes.
to create those lacquers? And is there any noticeable difference between the two that you would call out, or am I essentially good with this copy?
Well, yeah, that's that. There have been some improvements to my system, along through the years, and sometimes I go back and I looked at my old notes. I don't have any notes before 2008, so if it was mastered before then, I don't have them. But sometimes I go back to my old notes just to see what I did. I might not necessarily do exactly the same thing again, but it's a starting point, and particularly for levels and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, question.
Well, the thing is, I'm so happy with this version, and I got this before they announced that they were going to.
Now, is that a 45 or 33? That's a 45.
33, so it's 33.
Mhm.
So it's,
Okay.
so I was thinking like it's KG at Coherent is in the dead wax here.
Oh, okay.
It's similar to Chad's version. So I'm happy with this, so I kept it. I was just curious to know, like, is that, I guess, common for you to take the same tape and redo it multiple times?
There are some that I've done 3 and 4 times. You know, Waltz for Debbie, Village Vanguard. You know, Sunday at Village Vanguard. I've done those probably 2 or 3 times.
Mhm.
45, 33. You know, and I've just done them recently again for Kraft.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
everybody's very excited
and
about
going back even to the Miles Davis, you know, the 4 mono titles from Prestige, I've mastered those a couple of times, and yeah.
Did
That's
you do the Columbia mono stuff like back in 2013? The Miles Davis Columbia, there was like a whole series of monos that came out.
Well, I can't say for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
I did kind of blue
Mhm.
because they had originally released it for the 50th in, what would that have been, 2009,
Mhm.
and then it got kind of raped by the audiophile press, so they had me redo it in 2011. But
Mhm.
they're not stickered any differently. I don't know. I happen to have one, but I don't know how you find one.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's, you know, what's funny, that there's that whole series, a mono series of Miles's Columbia stuff that we recommend to people all the time because they sound so good and they're cheap.
Mhm.
Like if people don't want to spend, you know, money for a MoFi or something like that, you can get those for like $20 and they sound
Yeah,
amazing.
I believe I did do a couple of those. I don't know if I did a whole series.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to go back to real quick, and you said you didn't know how to respond to what Felipe was saying about, you know, your name as like the gravitas for release. Absolutely fact. The first thing anyone looks for is your name. Was it pressed at RTI or QRP or Optimal? They do a great job there too. But
Yes.
it's amazing how much gravity that carries in our community.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
guys
it's
like
nice
you
to
and
hear.
her. You
It's
know,
nice to hear. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And
we just know we're going to get something that's quality.
I think
Right.
it's yeah. I think it's you now, right, Chris?
I'm gushing over Kevin. Sorry.
That's fine. No, I just think because I think the next we could connect that to
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
So yeah, that's the next subject's kind of like on being a recording engineer as well as a mastering engineer now. So, you know, you've been in mostly mastering tapes for, you know, reissues and releases, and now at Coherent you're also a recording engineer. How does that change your approach to the mastering, or does it affect your thinking process? Like
Well,
how does that change things?
I actually started recording well before I started mastering. You know, I had a Revox and a pair of microphones back in the late '60s, and you know, I was going out doing churches and schools and that kind of stuff. That's how I cut my teeth on it. And I've done a lot of recording over the years. People are only becoming aware of it because of Coherent Recording and Cohearent Records. But yeah, it's not really a new thing to me. What was new was actually, you know, most of the stuff that they did in the early days was a stereo pair. So, or 4 mics if it was like a choir and an orchestra. But mixing 4 individual instruments with 1 mic each, which is what we did both on Kirsten's record and the new record. I guess I'll call it Anthony's record. That was kind of new to me, and I wasn't sure how well I was going to be able to do it. It's difficult, but you know, I can handle it, and it's been fun. I enjoy it.
So you're doing like multi-track then? Like you know, no?
No, oh no, it's mixed live to
Oh, cool.
track, just
Nice.
like Rudy did it,
Just like Rudy did it.
all
Wow.
those, most of those other guys, with the exception of the Columbia stuff that was done 3-track and then mixed down.
Well, that's got to be some pressure.
It is not quite as bad as direct to disc, but probably the next most difficult. At least you can retake it if you're not happy with it. You know?
Right. Yeah, but you're not like able to go back and remaster it after the fact with all the different.
Well, you can. Yeah, I mean, in mastering, there's certain things that I could change a little bit, but
Sure.
you know, yeah,
But you can't up the level of like the drum track.
not
Like,
really. Although the
like-
drums are on the right channel, so you could bring up the right channel, but that's
Sure,
going to
sure.
screw up your piano and bass balance. But yeah. I mean, there's certain little things that you can do, or I can add whatever's missing in the drums, the bass or the top, on the right channel only. You know, something like that.
would you ever consider doing something in mono?
Not really. I don't think there's enough of a market for it.
Okay.
In all honesty, I mean,
Yeah,
how
that's
many do
very-
you think I'd sell? You know,
I'd buy
500. You know.
I don't know, man. If you put it out, it's probably going to sell.
Well, thanks. I wouldn't have the confidence to do that, really.
Yeah.
You know, maybe way down the road, but not right away.
Yeah.
That actually brings up something kind of interesting. Do you have any insight into like the market and how it's doing for vinyl now? Like, do you have any insight? Like, it seems like to us that there's maybe some overpressing going on, like because people were so excited from the pandemic and how there was never, pressing capacity, and now it seems like the market's just getting flooded.
That's a good question. From what I've been able to glean from my distributors, what I'm hearing is that $39 records are doing fine. What's not selling at all are $150 records. I think part of it's the economy. I think part of it's just, well, geez, I could buy this one record or I could buy these 3 or 4, So that's what I'm hearing.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm firmly on board with not spending $150 on a record.
Yeah.
My system's like, I mean, I don't have a great system anyway, and I don't feel like I'm going to hear, a 300% difference.
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely.
And even on a great system, you're probably not going to hear.
It's marginal difference. Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of distributors, we were kind of chatting beforehand. For your Cohearent project, it seems like that you're in like Acoustic Sounds, Elusive Disc, Music Direct, InGroove. Looks like there's a great relationship there.
Yeah.
Is that essentially the where you're distributing your records to? Is there?
Also Steve King audio in Germany for the EU, and then also F minor, which goes by another name too. I can't remember, in the UK.
Okay.
So
I know that
a total of 6.
The Edkins one had multiple pressings. I think it sounded like that you were kind of just getting a sense of the demand. So for the new release, the first run, do you have the quantity that you'll distribute? Do you have like a number based on your experience with the first title?
Yeah, I'll probably do 2,500.
Okay.
I mean, it's top flight artists. I mean, okay, so should I make the announcement?
Yes.
It's basically, not basically, it's an Anthony Wilson album, jazz guitar. And he's being backed up by Gerald Clayton, coincidentally, again, because he was on Kirsten's record, but Anthony picked him for piano. His Gerald's dad, John Clayton, on double bass, and Jeff Hamilton on drums. So, I mean, these are top-notch players. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. The day after we finished the recording, all of them except for Gerald joined Diana Krall on her tour in Canada.
Yes.
So, I mean, they left the next day, and of course Gerald's not playing on it because Diana plays piano. But he's really busy too. So, and Gerald and Anthony are part of one of Charles Lloyd's trios. So they were on the last trio set that we did.
Yeah.
Busy guys, and it literally took a year to get the 4 guys together in my studio for 2 days in a row. It was
I bet.
So interesting, Kevin. So Kirsten recorded first, or he recorded before Kirsten? And in that regard, if he recorded now, it's going to be our second record. Do you feel any kind of, at least like inner pressure to make it even better? I mean, sonically, or?
Well, it's done. It's done. It's in the can, so to speak. We haven't mastered it yet, but we've got the tapes, and it came out great. I mean, Joe produced it, Joe Harley, and he's really excited. We're both very excited about it. And Anthony's probably hasn't even heard it yet because he's on tour. We sent him the files, but we had to dumb it down to 44.1, 24-bit, so that the files didn't take forever to download. We actually took the analog tape, went back to, even though I run a simul digital, we took the analog tape and went back to digital again, just so you could hear it with all the sauce, so to speak. So, but the tape, what Joe was listening to was 176 24, and what or 172, whatever it is, and 176, and what Anthony will be hearing is 44.1.
It's exciting.
So when the musicians are like, are the musicians as nerdy about this type of stuff as we all are? Like, are they excited like about your Hackensack West setup?
Yes. Anthony, it was so funny because Anthony came in to sit in with us. He sat in with us 3 or 4 times on Blue Note sessions with Joe and I.
Oh, cool.
And so I showed him the studio right after it was completed. And he said, just off the wall, he said, I could record in here. And I was like, wow, that would be cool. But I didn't push the issue, right?
Yeah.
So he calls Joe about a month or 2 later and he says, hey, I want to come by on another session to take a look at the studio and talk to Kevin. It's like, okay. So we're in the studio again. And he goes, hey, I want to do an album in here. And I said, you mean for you? And he goes, no, for you. And I'm like, wow. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm totally down with it. And so he says, yeah, I think what you're doing is great. It's a real throwback. He goes, you know, I haven't done a real back to my roots record in a while. So he said, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for everybody. And so, you know, we sent the 17-minute video to the other musicians. They saw it, liked it, understood what we were doing. And yeah, they came in and listened to playbacks and everybody was really happy. There were a couple of suggestions here and there after we did our first take, which we won't use. It was just a test.
Yeah.
And on we went.
So are they doing any standards or is it original composition?
Okay, we recorded 9 tracks and we probably have room for 6 on the LP.
Okay.
And let's see, 7 of the 9 were originals and two are covers. So I don't know what's going to be on the record. That I can't say yet. We just don't know.
That's awesome. So then you're already setting yourself up for, like, you know, an extended release in the future, man.
Yeah, I would love to get it out before the end of the year, but no promises. You know, I mean, it's just, and it's going to be particularly hard with, I think Anthony's going to be out with Diana until around the 15th of August. So, you know, he had a really great photographer. His name is Brian Bixby. Come by and take some pics. You can go to his Instagram and see a couple of things. But so, you know, Anthony's going to have to go through the pictures, figure out what we want for front and back cover. And then we have to have all of the takes and the songs that we're using figured out in a sequence before we can do labels and jackets. So it's like pulling teeth a little bit, but with a little luck, with a lot of luck, we can get it out before the end of the year. But otherwise, it'll probably be early next year.
That's nice.
Awesome.
It's such a great project. I was just looking. I mean, this is a silly question, but you know, like Blue Note and Prestige and Riverside, like they all have iconic labels, the original labels. And it's this is the Cohearent one here, and it's unique in its own way. In terms of the design, did you hire a designer to help with this, or was this something that you know? Yeah,
I'm using a guy named Chris Moosdale, who's in New Zealand, so that kind of adds a little bit of extra back and forth on it. But yeah, Chris did all the Music Matters covers, including the original ones that they created for, like Solid by Grant Green, and I think it was what was the Lee Morgan that they created a jacket for?
Home Music Matters.
Yeah.
Come on, Felipe, you got this. Felipe has nearly every single Music Matters.
I can't.
I can't remember. It'll probably come to me by the end. But anyway, so yeah, he created those from scratch. So he kind of knows the whole Reed Mile feel, you know, and all of that. Yeah. And I mean, I had some input to the label. He kind of came up with it. So I wanted it to kind of have a little bit of a Blue Note feel, but not be blue. I thought that would be too obvious.
So, that's a great point. Yeah, I don't think anyone's done green, so I think they're good.
Okay. Yeah, Prestige, I always thought had the ugliest label I've ever seen.
I thought that fireworks label, the yellow one.
I never understood that. I mean, really?
I agree.
But maybe that's just me. That's 2 of us anyway.
I like that. You know, the blue label that came out a little later. With the trident. That one's pretty decent. I mean, it's pretty simple, but it looks good.
Right. Right. But you know, Riverside Contemporary, they had some interesting labels.
Yeah, the Contemporary one's really cool, like just with the whole circle, especially like the old green and gold ones.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So Kevin, given all of that, was having your own studio your very first goal from the start, from the very beginning? Did you ever envision having a studio yourself? And why the tubes?
Well, it's very funny. I did want to have a studio myself, but I wasn't going to do it this way. Um, I had worked out a deal with a studio in North Hollywood back in 2017 to use their room and my gear. They had a room that was actually about the size of Inglewood Cliffs. It was like 35 by 35 with a high ceiling, not a vaulted, not that pyramid ceiling, but a high ceiling. And I thought, hey, this should be great. And I had heard some stuff that had been recorded in there and liked it. And everything was all laid down. They even were going to give me a smaller room just to keep all of my gear in, so I wouldn't have to schlep it back and forth. And perfect, right? 2020, the pandemic killed them. They were out of business in a year.
Oh, wow.
And and that ended that. And then it's like, what the hell am I going to do? I just didn't know. And I talked to a couple of other studios. I would have had to schlep all the gear. But anyway, then Rich Capeless did his RVG Legacy website. And I saw the layout of Rudy's room, and I went, wait a minute. My living room is about the same size. This is crazy, And my wife was like, do it. Let's do it, because it was a test. We'll see how it works. And, I said on that video, when I opened up the mics the first time with the musicians in the room, it was like, wow, it sounds like a flute note. What can I say?
Yeah, that RPG Legacy website is incredible. That's a great.
It is, yeah. Rich has just done an amazing job. Yeah. And he keeps adding little stuff to it. He finds more things.
Yeah, we've had a chance to talk with him a little bit too. He is cool. He's just awesome.
He is. Yeah. I agree.
And Kevin,
he came out. He saw the room. As a matter of fact, the day that he came out was the first time that Joe actually saw the room. We had just finished it. And I walked into the room and I said, jokingly, welcome to Hackensack West. And they're looking around, and the first thing Rich says, you've even got the lamp between the piano and the drums. And I went, yeah. And so Joe goes, Hackensack West. I like that.
That's awesome.
So it became the unofficial name of the studio. It's officially Cohearent Recording.
So Kevin, one of the greatest stories I heard about your studio, and if you don't mind telling, how did you get your console from Slovakia? I thought it was fascinating.
Oh, the Studer C37.
Yeah.
Yeah. It came up on eBay for $3,000. This is in 2005. Now you got to remember, 2005 was the year that analog audio tape went away, gone. Nobody in the world was making it. So the prices on tape recorders started really bottoming out. And $3,000, I thought that's a little high in this market. Nah. The guy relisted it like whenever the thing ran out for $1,500, like a couple of weeks later.
Oh, wow.
And I was tempted. I was going to email him, but I went, nah. Another week goes by and he puts it up for $800. But the problem was he wasn't listing it as a recorder. He said parts only. But he had a picture of all of the parts laid out on the floor. I mean, everything was there. I mean, the transport wasn't disassembled, but it's a very modular machine. And the record amplifiers, the playback amplifiers, the bias, the power supplies, they're all separate modules. So it's all laid out all over the floor. So I emailed the guy thinking, I wonder if he speaks English. He did. And I said, so what's the story? You're listing it as parts. He goes, oh, no. It's a complete machine, and I will ship it to you as a complete machine. I just don't want anybody to come back to me and say this doesn't work or that doesn't work or there's a problem with this or that and get bad feedback. And so I hit the buy it now right then. And it cost $500. It was $800 plus $500 to ship it from the airport in Slovakia to Los Angeles International, LAX. And then I went down and picked it up there. So that's the best purchase I've ever made in my life. And maybe maybe you don't know, they're going for $20,000 or more now. Some guy's asking $59,000 for one, but it's been on there for months. So I don't think he's going to get that.
So was that the first kind of big component piece that you have in your studio? Was that kind of the beginning of it all? And
well, not quite. I mean, I actually started building my first pair of U47s prior to that.
Oh, okay.
The Neumann clones that I built. And so, and already had the design worked out for my mixer, and I was starting to construct it.
Now, for the miking, that U47, is that used just for specific application, like
it's
the
pretty
guitar?
nice on anything you put it in front of. I mean, on Kirsten's record, I used it on her sax. I used it on the piano. And then I used my M49s, which are also Neumann's, and they're very similar, but a little different. But very similar sounding. They use the same capsule. But the housing is different and the electronics are different. But anyway, so yeah, they're all fairly interchangeable. And then the and I used the 47 on the guitar amp for Anthony, and I used a 49 actually on the piano for this, and I used a 49 on the drums. And then one of my favorite discoveries is I have the little stereo mic that they made that uses small capsules. They're like 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch. They're nickel capsules. The mono version of it is called a KM56. The stereo version was called the SM2. It was literally the very first stereo microphone made.
Oh, wow.
Not mine, but I mean the model. And it's a very bright mic. But for bass, it works so great. I just position it kind of right below the bridge, kind of aimed up, and you can pick up the fingering and all the little sounds that upright basses make. And so I use that on both recordings.
So it sounds you mentioned that these mics are clones, and it sounds like you developed them. It really sounds like this studio is really just like everything in here is like your own construction, and
except for the C37, that's pretty true.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. I just think that I think the uniqueness of what you're doing, that I think even if others wanted to replicate it, it would be extremely challenging to achieve what you've done over setting this up over the years.
I agree. I can't deny it.
Yeah.
And I admit that it was a wacky idea when I came up with it,
Great idea.
but I didn't realize it was going to take 15 years. I mean, there was, you could really say 12 years, because there was 3 years in the middle there. 2010, I was building my garage into this room that you're looking at behind you. And then in 2011, I moved in, but then I started almost immediately rebuilding my console. And that took 2011 and a chunk of 2012. So,
So you said it's your living room. Do you live there with your studio in your mastering room?
Actually, no. My wife loves that idea because it really makes her sound like a saint to have given up her living room and dining room. So I'm blowing that cover right now. No, my wife and I have 2 houses. This is my old house that I bought in 1994. And so I built the mastering room into the garage. That is also the control room when we record. And then the studio is in the living room, dining room. Now I rent the rest of the house to my son. And so he's got 2 bedrooms in the back, the bathroom, and then he has access to the kitchen, because we kind of jointly share that when we're doing recordings for hospitality. But yeah, he was willing to give up the living room and dining room, and I cut his rent. So
that helps.
That sounds great. Speaking of space, Kevin, one thing we're talking about here earlier. So it's a small space. It's great for a jazz band, but also like a garage band. Do you ever plan to release anything that's non-jazz?
Yes. And I'm already talking to a guy. I probably shouldn't mention who it is at this point. But the one other thing I would really like to do that I think would lend itself to the room is rockabilly.
Oh,
and,
cool.
With like 4 pieces again. Just guitar with a vocal, bass, drums, piano. So yeah, that's something I would love to do, and I think we will. Maybe a couple of albums down.
Yeah.
But most rock and roll requires multi-tracking. You couldn't record it live. A lot of it requires ISO booths and things like that for the vocals. I think I could do a live vocal on a rockabilly kind of thing, or with a jazz pianist who also sings. But for most things, it wouldn't be practical.
So
now, you were asking if I plan to have a studio. At one point, I thought I was going to build a multi-track studio and then also have the tube system in there. And so I bought a 16-track 3M, which I love the sound of, I wound up selling it because I realized once I got this room going, this is my primary focus, you know. There just isn't enough time to do all this other stuff too. It's been tough enough trying to do mastering and recording.
We were talking before this. I don't know if somebody mentioned it earlier, but you are like mastering everything. Like you're on pretty much like every new thing that's coming out with jazz, which I think is great. I have multiple reissues from you and some other engineers, which are great as well. But I tend to put yours above. I think you really do just your setup or whatever just has something special that is just, you know, to my ear, just I prefer it. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And I do think my system is pretty special. There's not another one like it in the world. It's the only totally class A discrete transformerless system from tape head to cutter head in the world.
Yeah. So, because it's a very like scientific, methodical job, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of feeling into it, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, I'd give the system about a 50% share and my input another 50%. But that's the way I look at it.
Do you have to? Here's something else I was thinking about with your all tube system. Do you have to change things out like in your cutter and with the cutting?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's another thing. People say, well, why aren't you using the tube system for some of the stuff that you cut? And it's like, that would be kind of competing with myself, and it's time consuming. It takes literally half a day to switch out. I have solid state electronics on one corner of the room and the tube electronics on the other, and I literally have to switch them out, you know, meaning, you know, unplugging all the cables, plugging them all back in again with the tube system. I'm actually using a different cutter head. I'm using a Neumann SX68, which is the slightly older version of the SX74 that I'm using for the solid state system, just because it is vintage and it fits right in the vintage. So so yeah, it's and then setting up the, you know, the tube mastering console and, you know, the tube electronics for the Studer playback. It's a half a day solid, and then a little less than half a day to put it all back again, but not a whole lot less.
Well, as much stuff as you're cutting, that's a big time commitment.
Yeah, it isn't feasible. It wouldn't be feasible. You know, people say, well, you cut the war, and I went, yeah, that was a test. That was just to see how the tube system, you know, did, and I was thrilled with it. It came out great. So
well, that thing went through the roof. I mean, after you told everybody that was a case, you can't even find that record anymore.
Yeah, I told Patrick Milligan, I said, you guys should put that out as a non-limited edition black vinyl. You know, you've got the metal parts sitting, you know, wherever they are. I think they're at I think they pressed that at Memphis. Pressing. But
yeah, it would definitely sell. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah. Plus, so. Kevin, as a tube amp owner, one thing always keep in mind, I gotta plan for the future, right? Because you never know if you're gonna find tubes again, right?
Right.
Are you using an OS?
Yes. Well, it uses a very weird power tube. It uses it's called a 6LQ6 or 6JE6. It's basically a TV sweep tube. It's one of the few amplifiers to use that for audio, and I love the sound of those amplifiers. They blew me away the first time I ever heard them. I have a friend who's got literally a megabuck system, and he's driving at full range. Actually, he's not. He is using a subwoofer amp, but like from 50 hertz down. But when I heard full orchestra played on his system, I went, God, I would love to cut a record with these amplifiers. It just rocks.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I have a huge stockpile of tubes, you know, because in 2005, I knew that's what I wanted to cut records with when I got to that point. So I started picking them up, and I was buying them in sleeves of 5. I bought 40 of them from a guy, brand new in the box. So yeah, I'm pretty well set for tubes.
That's great.
You mentioning orchestra, I pulled out this record I just recently picked up that you cut. You were recently on Steve Westman's panel with a bunch of great guys. I think Mazzy, the Wax, Patrick, the Vinyl Archivist, and Michael Poetry on Plastic, who is a classical musician. And I think you guys were talking about some of the classical things that you've worked on. And I was able to find this one from Speaker's Corner. This is wonderful. So you mentioned that you haven't done too much classical, but if anybody's interested in getting some Kevin Gray classical, there is some Speakers Corner stuff, and this one in particular. There's
a whole series, and there's a whole Columbia Masterworks series. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they were actually cut from the original analog tapes because apparently their classical division has kind of a different agreement from their pop division. I couldn't believe it. I got 2 huge boxes of tapes. I think it was it 10 or 20 LPs? I can't remember. It was a bunch of LPs. And there's Stravinsky plays Stravinsky.
Yep.
There's there was a lot of stuff with the LA Phil called the Columbia Symphony Orchestra or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're fantastic. I mean, I only have this one, but it sounds incredible. So
thank you.
I highly recommend. And I think, I don't want to misspeak, but I think the originals don't sound all that great. I don't think they're highly collectible, but the performances are fantastic, and this pressing is tremendous. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Kai Zeman was really pleased because he didn't have originals to send me. He had originals. He didn't want to send them to me because he wanted to make sure that he had them and they didn't get lost, and then he had them for comparison. And when he got my cuts and compared them to the original, he went, "Wow, you did a great job. Thank you." So that was nice.
Yeah. So,
but I also did the first thing that I did of any notoriety was right after I opened here in 2011. I did the Mahler box set for the San Francisco Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
Which was one of these things where they actually pre-sold it before they pressed it. And apparently some of those were allotted for dealers, but very, very few. And that was a thrill to cut. And that was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to cut. The Mahler 8th, if you're familiar with it, with full orchestra, pipe organ, and chorus. I mean, come on, and trying to get that on the record clean. That was quite a challenge, and I was really thrilled when I heard it. So,
the tape thing from Columbia. So they shipped those from New York to you?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do they
I was
ship?
as shocked as you are.
How do they ship stuff like that? Is it just through FedEx or UPS or something, or is somebody driving it?
No, FedEx.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
In a big flimsy cardboard box. I mean, they had wrapped them individually in bubble wrap, and I think they wrapped bubble wrap around the outside, but then they just put it in, it would be like, a moving and storage box,
Well, so all the Blue Note stuff is local, right, to you?
Oh yeah, those are hand delivered, and all the Warner stuff is hand delivered and picked up.
Oh.
Yeah, I just envisioned like some guy with like a briefcase with a handcuff on his hand delivering the tapes to you.
No.
Yeah, no, they have their own in-house messengers, or they use a messenger service, but yeah, it's a door-to-door thing.
That makes sense.
And also Concord with, their stuff's all stored at Iron Mountain out here, but yeah, those are also hand delivered, not shipped.
I think I heard or read Joe's. He mentioned once when Music Matter started, he went first himself to pick up some tapes. And he said he grabbed them. It was like shaking. He couldn't, it was drove so slowly, afraid of getting a car crash, everything.
Yeah. I know some horror stories about that kind of stuff too, but
what, I've heard, in passing about baking the tapes and it makes them. So is that something that you do at your facility, or is that something? It is. Okay.
I do. I have a convection oven for doing that. And that only applies to like 1970s, which would probably be from about 74 up through early 80s, I guess, maybe about 84, tapes that were made by Ampex, both 406 and 456. Those were the culprits. There was a major change in their formulation, and they just, over a period, they were fine for the first decade. And then we started noticing in the 80s, mid 80s, I guess, that they would start squealing, and if you let them continue to play, they would just literally come to a stop on the machine because they just sludged all over the heads and guides. And initially, we tried cleaning them by hand. You would have to play the tape all the way through and use a Kleenex, or a soft cotton cloth. And that didn't really, it helped, but it didn't fix the problem. And then Ampex themselves figured out that if they baked the tapes, it fixed it. So then they put out the information.
Do you have to do that every time? Like if you're like, let's say you cut a record and then a year later you get the same tape back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're after you bake them, they're only good for maybe another month at the longest before they
Wow.
start absorbing moisture again.
Mhm.
And you got to just bake the moisture out of them, and then they're fine. And
I've got
I
a
have tapes that have been baked. I mean, they usually put stickers on them indicating when they were baked. Sometimes they got 10 stickers on them, you know.
So it doesn't damage the tape at all then.
Doesn't seem to.
Mm-hmm. I've got a bunch of stuff my dad recorded. I mean, just home stuff from his reel to reel. They're all Ampex tapes, so I'm gonna have to figure that out probably if I ever actually want.
Well, if it's prior to that time, they're fine, you know.
No, it's like 72 to 78 or something.
So
Yikes.
what's the temperature then?
Yeah, I want to just put it in my oven or what?
They say 125 degrees for 5 hours.
Okay.
I go 135 degrees and for half the time. And the advantage to that is that you don't have to replace every single splice in the tape, because basically if you heat them up for 5 hours, all of the sticky stuff most of them had paper leader, all the sticky winds up on the paper leader and they just fall apart. So that's
you know what's funny, Kevin? That's the exact same path I took with my record flattener, the exact same temperatures. They recommend 125. I boosted to 135 and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I did a lot of experimentation on my own tapes before I ever tried doing that with a pro tape, and never had a problem. I even tried, I baked one at 135 for 10 hours and there was no problem. So I thought, okay, so then I started doing it on clients' tapes and I've never had an issue with it. Or somebody will come after me and say, you can't do that. It's like, well, okay. That's
have there been any tapes that just they're too degraded that you can't use them anymore?
That's a good question. Not usually, but boy, well, there's two things. The first tape that everybody used was Scotch 111, and we had that from 48 to like 64, right? It was like just about all there was out there. That stuff's almost perfect. There's never a problem with it. It doesn't wind smoothly, and it gets a little bit cupped and curled sometimes, but normally it'll play fine over the heads. Anyway, that's not an issue. 201, which replaced it, that has a nasty tendency, if it's not properly stored, and I don't know if it's humidity or temperature, but it will actually flake off. You'll get like little tiny bits of oxide missing to the point you can hold it up to the light and see through it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's not good. And some of those still play, but it usually just increases the noise level a little bit. They sound hissy when it first starts to happen. When you lose more, you can't play it because you can hear, as it's going over the heads.
Right.
That's one. Then the third thing would be Scotch 226 was the worst tape formulation ever developed. It was more like the Ampex. I think they were trying to copy what Ampex was doing because it was supposed to be compatible with Ampex. On that stuff, the oxide and the back coating stick together and you got nothing. When you put it into rewind, it's like confetti flying all over the room. The tape just literally disintegrates. I mean, I should say the oxide and the back coating disintegrates, and what you're left with is a clear piece of like saran wrap, absolute disaster, and it's unsavable. There's nothing you can do. Baking it just fuses it more tightly.
You're recording to tape for Cohearent, correct? And what tapes do you use for that?
Okay, a lot of people don't want to fess up on that. I prefer the European tape, which was originally Bassif, and then it became RMG or RMGI Incorporated, and then now it's called Recording the Masters, which we just shortened to RTM. Okay. So it's the tape that's made in I can't remember if it's France or I think it's made in France now. It was made in Holland for a while. It got around Germany originally. But
so it became available again at some point.
SM900 is the model number, and I love it. It sounds amazing. Well,
and you can buy that.
You've heard it if you heard Kirsten's record.
Yeah.
So you can buy that new today if you want.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's currently made.
Okay.
Yeah. The only other competing tape is ATR Magnetics, which is back in Pennsylvania. They're making their own tape. They were the guys that kind of took over building and refurbishing the Ampex ATR 100 tape machine, and that company's called ATR Service now, which the parent company sold, so it's owned by a different guy, but they still make the tape. So it's only the two types of tape available.
So do you think more people are starting to record analog again then? Or using analog tape?
I don't know about now. I mean, they were for a while. I kind of saw a resurgence. Well, after 2005, that year, in 2006, I think they launched ATR magnetics tape, and then about the same time that the Dutch, I think at that time, came on with the RMGI, and then tape was back, and a lot of people were mixing down to it. I don't think too many people are recording on 2-inch anymore, either 16 or 24. Everybody's still recording to Pro Tools, but then they mix it down analog sometimes to either half-inch 30 IPS or whatever.
You've been extremely generous with your time. This has been really fun so far.
Oh, I've had fun. It's been good.
It's great.
So, records. All right. I know it's a workhorse, but it's still my favorite jazz album of all time. So, this happens to be the version that I mastered, but like I say, I'm not sure how you find one. Actually,
so
okay, I guess I'm tooting my own horn, but all of these are ones that I cut, except for one.
Who put that one out? That was a gatefold, right? That you just showed.
Yes, the 50.
Oh, actually, I'm showing the wrong jacket. This is Chad's. He sent it to me. He sent it to me. I asked him if I could get one, and he actually sent me one.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, because you're right. It is a gatefold. The one that I did is not.
Okay.
Busted. Okay, so something else. If you liked Kind of Blue, I predict you're gonna like this record. I mean, this is probably my third favorite jazz album of all time.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Second favorite is this one, Blues and the Abstract Truth. I just love this record. It grabbed me the first time I ever heard it.
It's got a great groove on it. It's so good.
It does. And the musicians and just everything about it. I just love it.
And you cut that one too?
Pardon me?
You cut that one too?
Yes, I did. I did it for Chad for the Impulse.
Yeah, the acoustic sound.
I guess it was the A-Jazz series.
Yeah.
45, yeah.
And that's actually my original copy of it. I couldn't find the A-Jazz one. And this is one that I did recently that I also love, and I have the original of it. It's Gerald Wilson Big Band. Can you see it?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Moment of truth. A lot of truth in here.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Anthony actually came in and sat in on us mastering this, which was real.
All those Pacific jazz tone poets have been fantastic, and I credit to you, and then also I'm assuming Roy Dunan is the recording engineer on those. Is that correct?
No, he was not. That's the contemporary stuff. I'm not sure that we even know who the engineer was. I mean, most of them say audio by Dick Buck. Whether that means he actually recorded them or not, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But this is actually still sealed. I'd have to open, or maybe, let's see. No, I don't. Recording engineer Richard Bach, it says. So, okay. And then last but not least, this is an album that came out long ago, like maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And I started hearing it on the local jazz station, K-Jazz. And it's Anthony Wilson's Power of Nine. You guys familiar with this at all?
No.
Well, we'll probably sell this one out and whatever's left, if there's any around. This is just an amazing album. It's in heavy rotation on my system. I play it all the time. It was actually on Groove Note, Ying Tan's label, and produced by Joe Harley, which I didn't know when I was hearing it. I called up Joe and said, man, I'm hearing the most amazing Anthony Wilson record. And he said, what's it called? And I said, Power 9. And he goes, I produced that. I'm like, wow. So this was cut at Bernie's because that's where they were doing everything at that point in time. So that's my show and tell.
Awesome. So that last one, who put that out?
Groove Note.
Groove Note, yeah.
Ying Tan's label.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I could show all my pop stuff because we didn't discuss this, but I'll just say real quickly, I came up in the British invasion, so that was my go-to music when I was a kid up through teenage years, mid-teenage, early 20s. And so, I could put up a bunch of those records, Rubber Soul, Let It Bleed. Thank you. Yeah. That's my favorite Stones album. Creedence Clearwater. Well, that's not British Invasion, but, Creedence Clearwater. The Who, Who's Next. I probably have 15 albums that I consider my favorite from the rock and roll stuff.
So Kevin, in that regard, some records have been reissued, remastered to exhaustion. there's demand for them, of course. But which records that are either fun to you or that really need to be worked on that you would like to see out?
Well, obviously, I'd love to get a crack at the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen.
Now
But
that they should put through your analog console, the Beatles.
or
That'd
the
be
you mean the tube console?
yeah, tube console. Yeah, that would be a special exception.
I don't
Or
know.
not, I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows? But Abbey Road's never going to let them out, and they're happy with what Sean McGee's doing for them, and I don't think it would ever happen. But you can dream.
Yeah.
Have you cut a record that was one of your childhood favorites yet? Have you had that?
Oh,
have you had that opportunity?
Yes, several. I mean, I'd have to stop and think about what that would be.
What the thing I'm thinking about is hearing the master tape from one of your like records that you're infinitely familiar.
Oh, Dark Side of the Moon would be
Yeah.
an obvious go-to. I mean, I've talked about how when I threaded up that tape and hit play and the heartbeats start going, I mean, it sent chills down my spine. It's like I can't believe I'm actually playing the master tape on this. It was
I just got goosebumps just thinking about that experience, man.
yeah, no,
really
I get goosebumps just thinking about it again.
Mhm.
That was incredible. But what's really kind of funny is that when I get to remaster an album that I mastered originally in the 70s, and thanks to Jem Kurzman and the Classics series, I got to do Spaces and Places or Places and Spaces.
Yeah,
I was getting mixed up. Donald Byrd, I love that record. Bobby Humphrey. There were 2 or 3 that were part of that Sky High Productions run that I did, which were originally on Blue Note.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah. Another album that I mastered that I'd love to get to do a reissue on is an album by Ronnie Laws. I think it's called, is it Pressure Sensitive? I can't remember. There's a picture of an egg on the cover.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that. That's a great record.
I cut that originally. I love that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And I wish they would. I mean, the Classic series has been great. They put out all kinds of interesting things, kind of mixing it, keeping it mixed up.
Yeah.
It's been really cool.
Yeah, I've enjoyed that as much as.
Man.
I'm sorry?
The Classic series records, just a lot of them just sound incredible.
Thank you.
Like, it's amazing for the price.
Yeah.
The price point, it's just there's nothing else out there like it, I don't think. There's
Yeah,
not.
it is pretty hard. I think it's one of the best bang for the bucks ever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know what they're selling the OJCs for, but that's been really fun too. They're probably not as cheap as the Classics, right? Because they're pressing an RTI.
I think.
I think maybe just under 40 or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems to be the new price point for audiophile records, $40.
Right.
But we're happy to pay, honestly. I mean, these records, like these OJCs, like the Tone Poets, the thing I like about them is I can buy it and I'm never going to buy another copy. I don't feel like y'all are going to make some massive improvement in the next 20 years. It's going to compel me to spend another $50 to buy another copy of those records.
It'll be 100 by then.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm already off the $100 record, so that's what's so great. Like, people sometimes a release will come out and they'll be like, "Well, you can get an original of that for $10." Well, you're not going to get a mint original. You're not going to find a mint original of this for $10. Right?
Okay, now I'm going to call you guys out on something here.
Okay.
So I went back the other day and I started watching a couple of the older ones that you did, and I was really surprised. You guys did a thing on the OJC series.
Okay.
But you were mostly talking about, well, I didn't buy it because I have my original. Each of you guys, it's like you weren't really talking about the sound of the reissues. I thought that was kind of funny. But
trying to remember, I'm actually conflicted. So they're putting out the new Bill Evans Village Vanguard, Sunday Village Vanguard, and then Waltz for Debbie.
Right.
I have the OJC. I have all 11 OJCs of Bill Evans, and I love them and they're great. And I guess my point is that the amount of benefit from getting this, because I'm sure it will sound better. I'm almost certain of that. I haven't heard it, but I'm sure it's going to sound great. But that $80 for those 2 records, I could get a new record, for that.
Oh, I'm not arguing with that. It's just that it was sort of like a clickbait thing where you think you're going to be hearing you guys talk about the sound of those, and there was almost no talk about the
That
sound
might
of
have
the
been
reissue.
before they even came out, though.
Yeah.
But it may. I don't remember it may have been a clip of a live stream, which if there was a lot of people on the panel, those things get like crazy, and they just go all directions.
Yeah, I don't remember who all was on this
But-
particular one.
No, I bought the first two, and they're amazing. I love them. The two 11s, though, me and Felipe bought the Riverside box,
Yeah.
the 45. So I'm not gonna. I don't think I'm gonna rebuy those. Which that box sounds. You recut some of that stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, but I didn't do the box.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Bernie did that. I could be wrong.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just saying, I'm not gonna. I was, we spent $900 for that freaking thing. I'm probably not gonna buy another copy of those records. I don't think. But those other two, what was it? The Monk Coltrane sounds phenomenal. I love that.
Yeah,
record.
I like the Miles Davis monos too. Those are
Those are great. Those are great.
There's-
I
I
think there's
love that's some of my very favorite Miles Davis.
So you've cut a bunch of stuff for OJC then already.
Oh yeah, I've probably mastered 20 titles already at least.
Wow.
I don't know how many they put out, but
I think 4 so far, 4 or 5.
oh,
That's very
really?
good though. We're loving that series.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to talk about the ones that I've done then, but,
Yeah.
but you know kind of what they are, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a big secret.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're releasing the Cats next, and it's a record that everybody wants. And
Oh, love that record.
so rare to see
Absolutely.
represses, right?
Love that record.
Yeah.
So rare to see represses of those. So,
And Mal too. I mean, I think they're sitting
Yeah.
on some of the best jazz records. So.
Yeah, no, that's been almost as fun as doing the Blue Notes.
Yeah.
Not half the fun of doing the Tone Poets is working with Joe, but
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, he's a kick.
But Kevin, did you ever work with the Muse label?
Muse?
Yeah,
Maybe. Not that I recall the name.
because those are the ones that really deserve a reissue. They're so great. The free jazz, but post bop 70s, they have the best stuff out there.
Yeah, I don't think I've done anything for them. I've actually said definitively that I didn't do this or that, and then somebody holds it up and says, "Your name, your initials are in the dead wax." And it's like, okay.
Well, okay. So your calendar year, like how many records do you cut per year? Estimate wise.
Last year, 2022, I did just under 400 titles. I did 385 titles, I think. And this year will be a little bit less, but not a whole lot less.
Okay.
Up until that time, I was averaging a little over 300.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that was, it was a busy year last year. It was just
That's
nuts.
incredible.
I hit the ground running in January with a 60 LP side backlog, which is not a fun way to start the year.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much for coming. Does anybody have any final questions for Kevin?
This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
No,
Kevin.
thank you for.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, Kevin. Very, very thankful for your time and for such a great conversation with us.
Yeah. And for our viewers, if you let us know your thoughts about the conversation, we'd love to hear your comments, like and subscribe, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And Kevin, you're welcome back here. If you want to promote anything, if you want to talk about anything, we would love to follow up and continue the conversation.
Well, when the record's ready to release, whatever month that is,
Oh,
we
yes.
can talk about that again.
No, yeah, we'll reach out for sure.
All right.
All right.
All right, guys.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
You too. Take care.